Hello and welcome to Elvenhome, and to this week's edition, in which I do more scenic work on the Gasworks, including showing you how I've built the exterior fence, and also a bit more scenic work around the main depot, though there's not much there, but also give you a chance to see the Firth of Forth, which arrived, the second Britannia. So there's a short running session a bit later, which has both trains running with a rake of Britannia coaches. So let's get on with carrying on the scenic work, and I explain the work that I've got to do around the Gasworks. Picking up where we left off at the end of the last video, I said that I'd be carrying on the work of doing the scenic work all the way up here, just off there to where the school is, so that we can complete this area. And so the first part of that was to get the paving down, which I had done by the end of the last video, but I hadn't at that point painted and weathered it. I used the Vallejo stone grey, I think it's called. Not too thick a solution of that, not neat from the bottle, because particularly with thin MDF, as I've discovered, if you use it neat from the bottle, it's just too thick, so it needs to be thinned down a little bit. And then went over it with some WWS black soot, first of all. Then I went over with the light earth. That still didn't quite get me where I wanted. So I thought, I will have a go with the desert sand, or desert yellow rather, which is very light. So let's just put it into camera for you so you can see how light it is. It's obviously yellowy in colour, but that I was really pleased with, because it gave me a nice, first of all, it actually showed up the lines in the laser cut paving quite well, but just gave a nice variation to the darker tones that I'd been using. So that I considered to be a bit of a success. What you can see here is where the corner of the Gasworks will be. That is the little office with the gates, which are back to front but the right way up. The gate is going to go on there at the edge of the road, and then there'll be a fence that will run down the side here. So what we now need to do is to put a fence in here. Change position a little bit just so you can see that the fence is in place. In a moment I'll go down onto the desk and show you how this fence has been constructed. It's all constructed with Evergreen strip styrene, so it's not actually that difficult to put together, and I've borrowed from the Brentford Gasworks. I found a really useful picture of the exterior of Brentford Gasworks. Along one of its boundary fences, it had this long run of wood panelling, essentially, which is what I've replicated here. And I'm in the process now. I've got to build the custom piece. If I move along a little bit, I've got to build the custom piece that fits in here as a kind of zigzag, and the gates will sit there, and then there's another road to go along there, and I'll show you, those are the ones I'm in the process of building, and I'll show you a bit about how they go together. And then this just essentially sits down into the foam that's underneath the cork, because the posts are 3mm longer than the fence. So what I'll do now, I think, is go down onto the desk and show you how I make this panel. I thought I would start by showing you the materials that I used to create the fence that you saw there. The fence panelling is made up from Evergreen Styrene V-groove polystyrene sheet, item 2060 should you wish to buy some. If I bring it up to the camera, this is the 1.5mm spacing, which was thinner than the one that I used on the building, and gives a near enough, I think, for the kind of strip panelling fencing that you would have got, it probably in reality would have been a bit narrower than this, because 1.5mm is sort of 9 inches wide, which is quite a wide plank, and it's probably nearer 6, but this gives enough to be able to see definition without becoming too thin. And I'm not entirely sure they do a narrow one of this, but they may do. But I was happy with this, and that makes up the base. It then goes into H columns, which is the 2mm H column, item 282. And if I just take one of these out, there's nothing fancy about this. It's just, if I get it into focus, there we go. And then the horizontal bars across the back is item 120, the 0.5 by 0.5mm strip styrene. And that is the basic materials from which the fence is constructed. The other things that we used to create the fence was the Vallejo natural wood colour, which is 70834. Probably has another number as well, which I cannot remember. Oh, 183, I think it is. Yes, it is. And the white surface primer. And I'll talk through how I used all those things once I've cleared the desk and got ready to show you how I actually build the fence. What I'm going to do in this section is just explain to you how I got to this, which is the final remnant of the sheet that I prepared. And then how I take it from this to this, which is the first panel for the second wall, which I've made up, and I will now start adding to this to complete my length of fencing. The painting of this was fairly straightforward. It used the same process as I'd used for Harper's Yard. It was first of all painted with the surface primer, the white surface primer, having sanded the V-groove, and because I was going to be building it standing vertically, the sanding was done from top to bottom across the whole sheet to try and make sure that such grain as you can see is all running in the same direction as it would be from the planks having been cut and then stood upright. It was then painted with the natural wood colour, which is it's a very light colour, and it's a light paint, and sometimes you need more than one coat, but on this occasion one coat was more than enough. After that I went at it with the black soot. I gave it a good coating of black soot and varied. When you first put the brush on, which has got lots of black soot on, you tend to get a darker patch, but that's quite useful over a big area. And then I went over the top of that with light earth. And if I put up here a picture of the completed section, once it had all had all those three processes put through it, I then sealed that under some matte varnish, because I thought I would be likely to need to do a bit more weathering later, and I didn't want to be disturbing what I'd already achieved. And maybe peeling it back to the white underneath. And that gave me this, which is the last remnant of that sheet that you've just seen. The next thing to do was to cut the sheet down so that I had 20 planks wide, and to cut it also so that I was down to 16mm tall. Can remove that, don't need that now. And then to stick back to back the various pieces that I'd cut, because the fence has obviously two sides, and rather handily, two of these together, if I bring this up and try and get it into focus, fits just neatly into the gap of the H-beam, which is really very pleasing, because usually it doesn't, and normally you need to have to put a wedge or something in, but that fits really snugly into the H-beam. The H-beam was cut into 19mm lengths. So as you can see in this first panel that I've made up, I've got a 3mm foot that I can use to set it in place. And to do that, I used the little mitre block and the razor saw that you've seen me use before. This thing really is for cutting strip styrene. As you can see, you can't cut anything too wide, but for cutting strip styrene to length, it is just brilliant. So I can move that out of the way now. And once I'd got to the point of sticking them back to back, I then went and painted around 3 sides with the natural yellow, because of course once you start cutting into the card you've got lots of white, you can see that, but that's going to be the underside, so I don't need to paint that. I did have to do some fettling, because as accurate as your cuts will be with a knife, they're not going to be perfect. So I've had to use a file in places and trim some of them down so that they all sit square. And now it's a case of actually building the wall. Now I'm going to shut up now. I might do a voiceover, I'll see how it goes, and I'm going to have a go at putting 2 or 3 more of these in here. If I've got something that I think you particularly need to know, because most of it is pretty obvious what I'm doing, then I'll say. But otherwise, I just thought I'll show you me making up the next 2 or 3 panels as I go along and build the wall, and it is a pretty straightforward process. I'll then cut after I've done 2 or 3 panels until I finish the wall, because there is then a weathering process that gets you from this to the panels as you finally saw them. In constructing the panel, I'm looking to keep the top edge level. I'm not worried if there's slight differences at the bottom here, because I can hide that, and there are some very, very slight differences with the widths. But what you can't hide so easily is that it's all a bit wonky at top. So that should line up with the top, so that the top edge is looking pretty level. Now I give that a minute or 2 for the glue to really hold. It doesn't take very long, this contactor glue. It's pretty quick. And then I put on the bars at the back. That is just the 0.5mm strip styrene, painted just for the moment in the natural wood colour. I think I did run over it with some, now I think about it, I did run over it with some black soot, but it didn't take much of it, not surprisingly, because it's very thin. And that's what led me to think that actually I've got to do a bit more weathering. I was wondering whether I might get away with it, but having sealed this, there is more weathering that's needed so that this doesn't look too new and clean. So that probably will have set by now. Just give that a push to make sure it doesn't stick. Thank you. The next thing is to cut these so that they can go on the back. Now, ideally, all of these should be exactly the same width. The reality is they're not, or length rather. The reality is they're not. They're all slightly different. And so these can only be cut to size so that they fit. And you want them to fit snugly. So I had to do these as I was building the fence. So I can get one first of all. Let's make sure that's gone in. As indeed. There we go. And then use that to do the other one so that the two of these are both the same length. And then it will not look odd if one is very slightly different in length to the other. Move that out the way. And then all you have to do is put a few spots of glue on these, as small as you can make them, because you don't want glue going all over the place. So let me just give it 3 dabs of glue. Pick it up and turn it right the way over. And then line it up with the one next door. Now that's very slightly too long. So we'll give that a quick trim. Cool. Just want to make sure that is straight. Open it up. You've got a bit of time to play around with the positioning of these things, so you don't have to worry too much. Now I know this therefore is a little bit too long. I'll take that down. And when I made this panel, I lined it up against the fence that's already in place to make sure that they were broadly in the same position. So the line will run all the way around the Gasworks. Yes, that's what I'm making. Right, I think actually that is long enough. I'll just let that set, so I need to let that stand and set in place properly for you to see. That's how I make the panels, and it's just a case now of replicating that all the way along until I've finished all of these pieces, and I'm not going to make you sit and look at that. So I'll come back when it's finished and show you then the final bit, which is the weathering this up just before it goes on to the layout. Since you saw this last, I've completed all the panels and put all the horizontal bars on the back. And the only thing left to do now is the final bit of weathering inside the Gasworks. It would be really quite dirty, the fencing. So the outside is going to be left with this light colour. I'm not doing anything to the outside because I'm quite happy with that. The weathering that's in there already gives enough variation. But on the inside, these bars look too light to me. But also it just all looks a bit too light. So I got a small stippling brush this time, and I had to do this a bit by trial and error. The first time I did it, it didn't look quite right, but I discovered that actually, as ever, I don't need to be quite so worried about it, which is just to take this and draw it along. There we go, just keep drawing it along, and then it will run out, get a bit more, draw it along until I get to the end. And I'm not worried that there's puffs of it around in places, because this will all help to give a different feel at the end. Then I'm going to do the same along here, just draw it along. Now you have to be a little bit careful here, because you don't want to get so bold that you're ripping all the panels out from where they're glued in. But it's now a case of just beginning to move and work the powder along to give you the darkness that you need. Because what I'm actually trying to do is get some of the powder off, which it will come off as you work it. It will come away. Oops, must be careful. It is always better to work long ways rather than up and down, because as you saw there, I've just clipped that and made it lift off. And if you're not careful, you will cause damage. The thing is, it's very easy. I mean, if one of these patterns comes out, which it may do when I try and put it on the layout, it's easy enough job to stick it back in again. It's just taken the yellow off. Once it's on the layout, if I really feel the need to do a bit more, I will. I'll take another look at that in a moment. And the next time you see this, I'll have given it a coat of matte varnish, let that dry, and then I'll install it on the layout. So we'll have the two boundary fences. Well, no, I won't install this one until I've finished the sighting of the remaining wall and the little building, because the position of this one is critical to that. So you will see this the next time on the layout when it's about to be installed, but that won't be for a little bit because I've got the final bit of the fence to do. Well, you can see that the Gasworks is now in place again, or the fencing is all in place. That's been stuck into position. There's something else that I want to do at the end of the Gasworks, but that will have to wait until after Model Rail Scotland, more of which later. I've ballasted the track all the way up to the buffer stops, and the next piece of work will be to start work on doing the coal dust effect that will be wanted all around the tracks here, and probably in this area too. I'm not sure whether where all the gas holders will be and the tanks and purifiers, that would be covered in coal dust. Might just have been set into the earth, I think. But I'm going to make my mind up how I'll do the scenic work there shortly. I've put the gates in. The gates are posable. I've just done that by having two sizes of Evergreen tubing, one inside the other, which allows me to pose the gates. I didn't even remotely think about automating them because frankly I think it's not worth the time and effort, and it would have been a bit tricky because although this one is sitting in foam, so that would have been easy to whatever you needed to do to automate it, or easier, this one is sitting on a board with point motors and things underneath, and I just can't be asked frankly to try and work out how to make that work. So the Gasworks is coming on. You'll see there's only one gas holder sitting there, and that is a new gas holder because I ordered two new Scenics gas holders and I made the first one up. The two that were there before really were coming to the end of their life, and in fact the Modelux one literally was coming apart at the seams. If you put any gas in it, there'd have been one almighty bang. So I will build the next one of those in the next week or so, and then the fence that will run along here and will also run from here down to there has to be built, and I'm going to try something there, more of which I hope in the next video. One of the things though that has become clear is that there is not space for the brewery to be here. It's just too big, it's too long, and the buildings are just much too big. So if that goes anywhere, it will go up to High Elven, but that's for later in the year. What I do think I could put along here though is that given that this is going to be a strip of land and then it will go down to the canal, is I think this would be a good place to reinstate the scrapyard, which as you know I wanted to have on the layout, and I think that's the kind of little bit of land that's not much use to anybody which would be just right for the scrapyard, and so that's where I think I'm going to put the scrapyard back in, so we'll wait to see for that. Now I think it's about time that we allowed these two trains to run a bit faster and for you to get a better look of the two Britannias pulling their rakes of Stania coaches. I think one of them is actually pulling a couple of Mark 1s rather than Stanias, but nonetheless that will do. So we'll do that and then we'll come back to wrap the video up. I thought I'd come down to this end of the layout to complete the video this episode. I'll put some footage up here which I took. I've completed the work of weathering what was the lighter area. I've also put bushes all the way down the gap that was there between the line up to the coal stage and the fencing, which I thought would just become overgrown. I make up my mind what I'm going to do further on from there, and I'm not going to do any more to the area that I completed last time round until I've found any things that I might get from Model Rail Scotland. Henrik, in his comment in the last video, pointed out that the turntable was very bright, and he's absolutely right, it was. It had received some weathering, but not a lot, because the last one that I put in, I put quite a bit of weathering on, and it actually made it difficult to turn the turntable. So that has now been weathered, again using the technique of black soot mixed with IPA, which Timbersurf suggested to me, and it works really well because the IPA evaporates off really quickly, and you get a really good effect, as you will have seen from the clip that I put up just a bit ago. It's quite nice to look down this end now from where it was a little while ago. I'll put a picture up here that was taken, I think, at the beginning or the end of 2021, and another which I've just recently taken. And it's always good to see how much you move on your layout over time. Now, the next video will go up in 3 weeks' time, because in a fortnight's time it's Model Rail Scotland, and there are one or two things that I'm really hopeful that I'm going to be able to get there, which I would like to be able to show you. And if I don't show you them, they won't be in time, obviously, for Friday fortnight, and if not then it would be another fortnight after. So the next video will be on the 3rd of March. I hope you've enjoyed this video and the work that's going on around the Gasworks. If you've liked the video, please do give it a thumbs up. That would be a great help. And if you've not subscribed, please do subscribe. It would be great to have you along, and hit the bell notification so you know when I'm uploading. But until I speak to you again oh yes, comments. If you've got any comments, please do let me have any comments, because they are just so helpful in all sorts of ways. But until I speak to you again, in 3 weeks' time, that's bye-bye from me. Bye-bye.